Good evening. If you're just joining, I'm getting started here. I want to welcome you to our Thursday, 7 p.m. Central Time stream where we go over the most pertinent topics of the week, policy topics, and of course, political topics. So, again, I hope if you're just joining, you're familiar with our 7 p.m. Central Time Thursday show here. My name is Donna Imam, and I am running for U.S. Congress out of Austin, Texas. The very, very blue spot in all of Texas that you're very familiar with. So today I want to dig deep into reconciliation because we're right in the thick of it. And I want to, over the whole month, I've been covering parts of reconciliation and what's in the reconciliation bill versus what was in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So today I want to focus on 4 items in the reconciliation bill. I know all week, all of you have talked about taxes. It's been on the mind of many, many of us. And I want to focus on what is in the reconciliation bill in terms of taxes and whether it actually even has a little dent on the amount that the ultra wealthy pay in this country. And you might be surprised at how far the $3.5 trillion bill goes, because in terms of really making a dent on the ultra wealthy and the wealth that they have and that they've accumulated over the generational wealth, it may not be as you think or you'd like it to be. Let's put it that way. So we'll talk about taxes. We'll talk about prescription drugs and what's going on there and why it's hit a little bit of a hiccup. And will the government be able to negotiate through Medicare? Will Medicare negotiate with big pharma to be able to negotiate drug prices in the United States? And what is it that's really happening? So we'll go into that. We'll also talk a little bit about the SALT cap and how it's impacting representatives specifically on the East and the West Coast, but more importantly, representative in New Jersey, New York that seem to have a big interest in removing the SALT cap. And who does it really benefit to remove the SALT cap? And I want to talk also about childcare. This is a topic that really needs strong discussion, not just in our country, but across the world. Who is responsible for paying for childcare? Who actually bears the brunt of childcare and bringing children up in this world? And who should really, foot the bill for it? So we'll talk a little bit about what's going on there. There are a lot of aspects in this bill for childcare, and that's going to be very advantageous and helpful to middle class families with children trying to raise children. And then we'll end it by talking about the debt ceiling and what's going on in there, because we are at the very top of the debt ceiling. And if we don't increase the debt ceiling or do away with it, none of these bills are going to become reality. So let's get started and bring you up to date on where we are. So on the reconciliation bill, for the last 2 weeks, there were 13 House committees that spent hours and hours marking up the legislation to meet the self-imposed deadline of September 15th. So this is when the pieces of legislation are debated inside the committees and they're voted on in order to pass through the committees. Now, a lot of the content of these 13 committees and what will be in the final $3.5 trillion bill has been released in pieces. That doesn't mean it's the final bill. Now, in the Senate, they're actually doing the same thing. They are also poring over the bill so that they can try to all meet this, sort of like arbitrary, non-binding deadline of September 27th, which Speaker Pelosi has agreed to in order to pass both the bipartisan bill and the reconciliation bill together. So they pass through the House together. But now, remember, House progressives, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, has said that they will not vote on this bill, on the bipartisan bill, until the Senate has passed the reconciliation bill and the bipartisan bill, and they will be passed together in the House. And that's how these two bills are tied at the hip. So what's happening right now with a lot of the moderates are saying, well, look, there are lots of things in here that are very progressive, quote unquote progressive, And we don't want to have to defend them to our constituents unless they're really going to be part of the final bill. So they want what's called pre-clearance. And pre-clearance is a process that instead of going to conference committee after coming out of the House and after coming out of the Senate, where they reconcile the two bills and merge them into one final bill that will be voted on and then hopefully passed and goes to the president's desk, they want pre-clearance, meaning they want to have this sort of conference committee deal in the back. So the Senate is like, yep, if you put this, this, and this in the bill, we will go ahead and we have all the votes to go ahead and get this bill passed in the Senate too. So that's what's going on in the background. But I must say, for the last 2 weeks, they've been extremely diligent working through this reconciliation bill. And remember last time we went over some of those items that I'm very excited about, for example, paid leave. But remember, just because there is paid leave doesn't mean that the bill is being written to the full advantage of the American people, of working Americans. It is really important that this bill address the people in the bottom 50% all the way down to every single individual that can benefit from it. And that's where we need the Progressive Caucus to step up their game and to ensure that they are watching what's actually in this bill. That's where their impact really makes a lot of sense, especially for those of us who want to see the American people really get something out of this bill and not just be a write-off for, major corporations. Now, I say this because of this. It doesn't matter how much money you give middle-class people. Middle-class people will end up spending almost all of it on housing, food, childcare, just goods and services in their home. And most of that money, if not majority of it, will end up in the hands of corporations, because when you pay your rent and you buy your groceries and buy, things that you need for your children, whether they're shoes or backpacks or clothing, etc., whether you're buying a new appliance for your home or you're buying anything in the house whatsoever, it ends up in the hands of corporations. So money is always going up to the wealthiest people in our country. It doesn't matter how much money you give the bottom 50% or even the bottom 90% of our country. The majority of people are spending the majority of their income. Now, upper middle class people are able to save to put a down payment on a home, but we need to make sure that that is the case for every single family in this country, no matter what. That's where the importance of marking up these bills come, and that's where all of the contention going back and forth between what's actually in the bill is happening in these committees. So let's talk about taxes. So I know that all week long and on social media, we talked about taxes and how the wealthy in this country just do not pay taxes in many cases because there are so many tax loopholes for them to be able to protect their assets from being taxed. We also saw earlier this year, ProPublica did a huge expose on how billionaires, 100 millionaires and up protect their assets, and these assets grow completely tax-free, over hundreds of millions of dollars every single year. And these assets are then passed on to heirs completely tax-free with what's called a stepped-up basis. So I want to explain that to you just a little bit. And before I get into explaining that to you, let's talk about what is actually in the $3.5 trillion bill. Remember, it's called reconciliation for a reason. The Democrats are trying to raise money from other sources of revenue in order to pay for the items in the bill. And most of that money, approximately $2 trillion or $2.1 trillion of it, comes from taxes on corporations and, of course, individuals in this country. So let's see where that comes from. Right now, the plan in the bill, and again, this is not final, what's being debated is about 18% for small businesses earning less than $400,000 a year annually, 26.5% for businesses earning more than $5 million, and then 21% for all other businesses in between the 400K and 5 million. That is the corporate tax rate that is being basically floated by Democrats in order to pay for this reconciliation bill. Now, the second part of it is what will impact actual individual Americans. These are high income Americans. So if you're a single earner and you earn annually 400K or more, your tax rate will go up from 37% to 39.4%. So almost, you're paying almost 40% income taxes on 400K and more. And if you're married or couple living together, filing joint taxes, if you make 450K and above, you will also pay this top tax rate of 39.4%. Now, there is a 3% surcharge for individuals and families that are earning over $5 million. Now, all of this is income tax. And you know how I feel about income tax, right? I always say that the ultra, uber wealthy really have a good laugh when they see income tax, because most of them, their wealth comes from assets, generational assets, stock portfolio, real estate portfolio that absolutely grows 100% tax free. And they are able to take, umpteen amounts of loans against these taxes at pennies on the dollar, as low as 2%, sometimes lower than 2% interest rate on the amount that they can borrow against their assets, specifically stocks. Stocks can grow completely, untaxed for decades and decades and be passed on to heirs with a stepped up basis. So what is a stepped up basis? So to give you an example, let's say, for example, you today purchased $10,000 worth of $10,000 worth of stock in a company. And for the next 90 years of your life, until you die, that $10,000 grows to, let's say, $100 million, right? You invested in a really, really good company. It grew astronomically, and now you have $100 million. That stock is still worth $100 million. Now, if you haven't sold the stock, it's set in your portfolio decades over decades over decades, and you can take, loans against it. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans to live a very comfortable life. And you can take those loans at a very small percentage. Now, most of us are unfamiliar with this process, because most of us get up in the morning and we go to work for a living, and the majority of Americans make less than $100,000 a year. We can't imagine taking hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans against stock portfolios. So we don't really think too much about this. But this came out earlier in a long investigative reporting done by ProPublica, and you definitely should go up and go through that and read that. And ProPublica's also done some really nice explainer videos that explains to you how this works. So that's really what's going on here, that majority of this money is coming from income tax. Now, capital gains tax, the top rate, is being proposed to go up. So right now, the top rate for capital gains tax is 20%. And the proposal here is that it go up to 25%. Now, that would be the only, what I would call, non-income tax that is being proposed here. Almost all of the money that is being raised to pay for this reconciliation bill is coming from income tax. And that is a very, very important aspect. Now, don't get me wrong. If your income is $400,000 or above, that's a very comfortable income, and that really impacts a very, very small percentage of people above. We're talking about not the bottom 90% of Americans. Bottom 90% of Americans should not be seeing any tax increases because of the reconciliation bill. But the point is this. The point is that billionaires who have net worth of $10 billion all the way up to $200 billion, we're talking about Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, those folks are not paying taxes at all, because they don't live off of income and they don't depend on income to be able to live day to day like a normal American family does. And we are not taxing them. So until we have a wealth tax, and a considerable one at that, for the top, the ultra wealthy people in our country, we're making very little impact with just taxing income. Taxing income is nowhere near sufficient. And I'll leave with this on this tax rate. If we properly taxed wealth, we would have so much money in this country to pay for housing for every single person, to be able to pay for education for every single person, to be able to pay for healthcare for every single person. Our job as a country and a world should be to take away every single barrier that is in front of every single human being so that we can free our minds and our lives to really work on discovering the wonders of this earth. Because today we have not explored the full potential of human beings to try to understand what our capabilities really are, because we are too busy using our entire lives working for a living. We are living just to work, just to be able to survive, just to be able to put food on the table and have shelter. And that makes absolutely no sense, because we have more than enough wealth in this world, not just to cover every single American, but to cover all these basic needs for every single human being on earth. And until we realize that, we will not realize the full potential of human beings. And so with that, let's talk about the next couple of topics here. This is a favorite one for Democrats, talking about prescription drugs. So if you're not familiar, the pharmaceutical industry in the United States, pretty much the American people are funding all of the entire world's pharmaceuticals. Drugs that are sold across the world for $1, $20 are sold here for $100 and more. We are paying, in some cases, 10 times, 20 times, 30 times the prices that people are paying for the exact same drugs all over the country. And if you want to forget about the rest of the world, just look to Canada. We have heard this over and over again, that that Canadians are paying for American, pharmaceuticals at a much, much lower rate than anywhere else in the world. And why is that? It's because when it comes to the United States, we are not holding pharma accountable for this pricing. We are all familiar with the Epipen scandal that happened, in the last 2-3 years, where the price of EpiPens went up from somewhere under $100 to close to $1,000, right? Because pharma companies could monopolize the source of that drug, even though it literally costs pennies on the dollars to manufacture. But they're able to get this money because it's a life-saving drug, and people will buy it for their children or themselves, just to be able to live and survive and not die, right? That is the whole game here. The pharmaceutical companies and corporations do not care where their money comes from. The fact that almost all of it is paid by Americans is not of concern to them, as long as they're getting it. So this is a huge contentious fight that is right now going on in the reconciliation bill, because Democrats, including President Biden, ran on being able to negotiate prices for Medicare. So Medicare is literally the program that's available for anybody 65 plus to get healthcare in the United States. And right now, Medicare has no ability, get this, no ability to negotiate pharmaceutical prices with drug companies. And why do they not have that? Because it was written into legislation that they are not allowed to negotiate prices. This is the most ridiculous piece of legislation that I've ever heard of, because it doesn't matter what company you work for, private corporation or not, being able to negotiate prices and being able to negotiate between multiple companies providing products to you is a basic tenet of any kind of business that you do, any kind of product exchange, or any kind of product or service that you're giving in exchange for getting paid for that product or service, right? But Medicare is not allowed to negotiate drug prices. And now, in this $3.5 trillion bill, this is something that is being debated. Now, here's the funny thing. You have 3 House Democrats that consider themselves, quote unquote, moderate. I will let you decide whether you really think this is a moderate position or not. They are the ones that are saying that they won't vote for this. So We have Representative Kathleen Rice out of New York. We have Representative Scott Peters out of California and Representative Kurt Schrader out of Oregon. These three folks have voted against the ability for Medicare to be able to negotiate drug prices. So in the House Energy and Commerce Committee, this piece of legislation failed. In the House Ways and Means Committee, however, it did pass. So for now, this provision in this bill is still alive. But this is something that every single person in the United States, even if you're a Republican, should be fighting for. There is absolutely no reason for GOP members, let alone Democrats in the House, to be fighting the ability for Medicare to negotiate drug prices. It makes absolutely no sense at all. And yes, this is extremely painful for Big Pharma, because they've been getting all this money for free because it's just there and they can get it. And so they can see that they are not going to have opportunity for revenue if this goes through. Their revenue sources will be impacted in some way. And they're fighting it, and they're fighting it in big ways. They're not only lobbying, members of Congress that they have paid into their congressional campaigns and other ways that they have supported and helped over the years, but they're also making the case that they will be less innovative if they, for some reason, don't get these, they can't price gouge us. So basically what pharma is saying is that, look, if we can't price gouge Medicare, we're not going to be innovative anymore. And as many of you are aware, a lot of this research is already footed by the United States government through grants to universities and directly to pharmaceutical companies in many cases. Many of these patents are placed on these drugs after the research has been done in academia. So to say that we can't get innovation because we can't gouge Americans for drug prices is a really, really unique argument, I must say. But it has been working for a long, long time, and it is absolutely necessary that this make it into the bill. It will have a huge impact on prices of drugs for seniors. Now, Big Pharma knows this. They know this. So what they're doing right now is they are running TV ads across many different markets, saying and telling seniors that they will be unable to get the medication that they want. So they're using a scare tactic, which works really well, specifically on the senior population, saying that, hey, if you're getting this sort of specific brand of drugs, for example, now Medicare won't give you the specific brand. They won't give you the proper formulation. You're going to get a generic brand, etc., etc., and the tactics go on. But this is what Big Pharma is fighting. It's being fought big. Watch for this. If this makes it into this reconciliation bill, that is a huge, huge win, not just for Democrats, but for American people across the board. And this will make a huge impact in our country in terms of the cost of healthcare long term. So that's one of the things that the centrist Democrats are fighting. There's another one called the SALT cap. Now, the SALT cap came into play actually under the Trump administration when they passed their upwards, transfer of wealth, basically letting the wealthiest people in our country pay the least amount of taxes. The SALT cap was put into play. And what this is basically a $10,000 limit on the federal deduction for state and local taxes, meaning if you pay anything over $10,000 for state and local taxes, you cannot deduct any more than $10,000 on your federal deduction. Now, this specifically hits people who live in homes where they're paying real estate taxes that are extremely high. So if you have a home that's very, very high in price, for example, maybe it's in the millions of dollars. So if you live in New York City and you own your own home or your condo, or you live in New Jersey or in California, and in some cases, believe it or not, if you live in Texas and your home is extremely expensive, there is a very good chance that you are paying real estate taxes over $10,000. Now, we have three representatives that are fighting this, and they want the SALT cap to be in this $3.5 trillion bill. And here's the reason why. So there's Rep. Tom Suozzi from New York, there's Rep. Richard Neal from Massachusetts, and Rep. Pascrell from New Jersey, I believe. I'm not sure if I botched their names. I apologize if I did. But these three representatives represent New York, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, but primarily representatives in New York and New Jersey are saying that they're getting a lot of pressure from their constituents about lifting the SALT cap. And the bottom line is that this is a write-off that primarily benefits wealthy people or upper middle class people. There are very few people that would be considered middle class that own homes that are paying real estate taxes or state and local taxes that amount to more than $10,000. So you'd have to be really high income to be beneficiary of that. Now the big problem with removing the SALT cap is that actually makes this bill more expensive, right? So if you're taking away that revenue, now all of a sudden, you have to find a way to get more revenue to make up for the amount that these folks are not paying in terms of taxes. So that is another item of contention in the reconciliation bill that is being fought right now. So with that, let's talk about childcare. Now, this is an item that is really being debated hard right now in our country, and it's for two reasons. One, the pandemic has spurred this conversation in a very, very big way, because corporations are saying, look, we're having problems getting workers right now, and it's not just because of pay, but it's actually because parents are unable to find childcare, reliable childcare that they can go back to work reliably. Now, there's two aspects to this. One is many, childcare centers for little children still have not opened or not fully open because of the pandemic. Number two is a lot of people can't afford these childcare centers, so they often leave their children with smaller daycare centers where there's an individual looking after a bunch of children in their home. And in this case, they may be somebody who's older or somebody who, has health challenges, and children can't get vaccinated. And even if they could, it is very, very possible because of the pandemic that they are no longer running these much smaller daycare centers or just providing daycare for, friends and family. Sometimes people are leaving their children with another relative or grandparents, for example, and those options are not readily available. So this is not just a problem for essential workers or hourly workers. This is also a problem for people doing white collar jobs, not being able to have reliable childcare. Even if you're working from home and you have young children, they do ask of your time, and you do have to take breaks to be able to take care of them or get them lunch, etc. Now the second part of it is that we saw a lot of articles about millennials choosing not to have children because it's so expensive to raise children in our country. And this is not just a conversation for our country, but across this world. Is like, who are actually paying for raising children, and who are the beneficiaries of raising children that are productive members of society? One of the things that we don't talk about is that the person who is actually giving birth to the child, which happens to be in the 99% of the time, women, mothers who are carrying the baby to term, we don't talk about the physical aspects that the person carrying the child have to go through, and the physical challenges that they have to overcome, both with respect to supplying, the fetus the proper nutrients in their body, the fact that when you're pregnant, you lose so much from your body. For example, calcium is lost from the mother's body in a big way. We don't talk about the brunt of the force of having and bearing children, and then when they're young, having to look after them on a constant basis. And then being able to afford, pre-K, right? Pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, until they go to school. And, we're lucky in this country that we have still a public educational system. So, once they're old enough to go to public school and first grade, they're there. But this entire time, parents are not only footing the bill for pregnancy, for holding the child, within their body for an entire 9 months, but then also raising that child, being able to put nutritious food on the table for that child, being able to educate them, to spend hours and hours and hours doing homework with them, working on projects with them, taking them to museums and other places, taking them on vacation, entertaining them, middle class, upper middle class families, those that can afford to, giving your child so much of your time, money, effort to raise them into well-adjusted and well-rounded human beings that can be productive in society. Who is the actual beneficiary of that? If you think about it, it's corporations. Corporations with zero investment are getting a, human infrastructure, right? What they call human capital brought to them on a platter. Some of them that are highly educated, that have been to college, that have, hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. All of this burden is on the parents for the first 18 years. And then through college and graduate school for many people, it's on that individual themselves. Corporations, on the other hand, have zero startup cost. They start with nothing. Now, if, for example, I'll make it up, if they were using robots, for example, there'd be investment in research and development of robots. There would be a startup investment if you were using a robot to do some portion of your work in a corporation. If you're using, these major servers, for example, to process data, some of these servers are upwards of $80,000, $90,000. So there's infrastructure costs in order for you to be able to do anything. But when it comes to bringing in a human being that can come in and solve the most difficult challenges in our country within a corporation, there's absolutely zero startup costs. Now, I know many of you are thinking that if you have a high paid job, maybe in technology, some of them do start off with a what's called a sign-on bonus, for example, right? But that sign-on bonus is usually so minute, it's measly compared to every other startup cost of being able to do successful business. If you think about it, we do not reward parents for the 18 years of their life plus the 9 months that they hold the baby in their stomach. We do not reward the individual, the mom, the person that's raising the child, that is carrying the brunt of childcare and paying for it. We don't reward them in any way, shape, or form. And that is something that is not discussed in our country. It's not discussed across the world. But without parents bringing up well-adjusted, sociable, smart children, we wouldn't have these corporations, and they wouldn't be making billions and billions of dollars and wealth. And that is why the wealth tax, I go back, is so important. That is 100% important that we focus in on a wealth tax. Just taxing income will not solve our problems. We must get on board with the wealth tax, and I hope I've given you some really good reasons to think about why you should support the wealth tax, why this is going to not only help every single person in our country, possibly across the entire world, it will remove all the barriers to true human potential, to understanding what is our potential, what are we really capable of in this world, and what have we not discovered. I think that's what's standing in our way, so we must focus on that. I think it's really important that this country not just talk about taxes, but we talk about wealth taxes. And I hope that you'll start to have these conversations with others as we go to our final topic of today, which is the debt ceiling. So as you know, the United States has, I think the debt right now is over $29 trillion or something like that. Now, what's being fought between the Republicans and the Democrats is that without removing the debt ceiling, which we have almost reached, this $3.5 trillion bill cannot go through. So the way this works is when the United States government takes on debt, they usually sell treasury bonds to be able to take on that debt. They're not just, in fact, just printing money. They're selling those treasury bonds mostly to Americans, but also to foreign governments as well. These are United States treasury bonds. And so if this debt ceiling is not increased, they won't be able to do all of these things that they want to do. Now, the GOP is basically saying, hey, Democrats, you're on your own. And the Democrats are saying, wait a second, underneath the Trump administration, you actually raked up the debt ceiling $8 trillion. So all of this, small government, oh, what about the debt ceiling? What about, mortgaging the futures of our American kids that the GOP talks about in and out all the time? When they talk about the debt ceiling, that conversation was unheard of during the Trump administration. In fact, they ran it up almost $8 trillion. Normally, this debt ceiling is passed in a bipartisan way because it's something that the United States government has to do. Because if they don't do this, then the United States government starts defaulting on, the loans that have been taken against these, treasury bonds. And that can have a cascading impact all over our economy and every single sector of our economy. But the interesting thing is this, and I want to leave you with this, and I tweeted this out earlier a day ago or two, that if McConnell is insisting that Dems unilaterally raise the debt limit, right? And the only way to do that is to make it part of the reconciliation bill. That makes the reconciliation bill completely required. It's no longer optional anymore, because if you have to do it unilaterally, you're going to have to put it in the reconciliation bill, which means, folks like Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, who are very much against the $3.5 trillion bill, would have to vote yes on a reconciliation bill. It's not like they can just pass the bipartisan bill and wait. In fact, it becomes very, very urgent because I believe they have to get it done by the end of this month. I think October 1st is when they have to get it done. So it makes this reconciliation bill mandatory. It makes it even more urgent. But the kicker is this. House Democrats can not only push through the full Biden agenda, whatever they want, but they can also eliminate this debt ceiling completely. Because this debt ceiling is completely arbitrary. It's done, whenever we reach the ceiling, we expand it over and over again. And again, there's a lot of demand for United States Treasury bonds. And the demand comes from the fact that we as a country create wealth, enormous amount of wealth in products and services. And we do this because every single day, millions and millions and millions of Americans get up in the morning and they go to work and they're productive and their productivity is very, very high. That is where the value of the United States comes from. And that is where the value of our investment in our country, which is also referred to as our national debt, comes from. It is an investment in the American people, and it is not an investment by the United States government. It is not an investment by billionaires. It is an investment in the American people by themselves. This money is a product of all of us getting up in the morning, producing products and services for this country, for this world, that benefits billions of people, not just around not just in this country, but around this world. And that's where the value of our country and our economy comes from. It comes from the American people. So with that, I want to thank you for staying on today and listening to the perspective over here from Austin, Texas. Again, I hope you'll join me next Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Time. And for those of you who are watching this on Twitter or follow me on Twitter, Monday nights at 9 p.m. Central Time, I do a Twitter Spaces. I host one, and I open up the mic for anybody who wants to have a one-on-one have a conversation with everybody on there. You can bring your questions, your comments, or just information that you want to share with me, that you want me to know. And so I invite you to join me on Twitter at 9 p.m. and tell your friends and family if you've enjoyed watching the 7 p.m. transmission. Tell them to come and subscribe to the YouTube channel or watch it on Twitch, and share with your friends and family on social media. And with that, I want to say to everybody, have a wonderful